Talk Radio. And you can get on your phone. We're ubiquitous on the phone. I'm glad to say, get the TuneIn Radio app. It's called the TuneIn Radio app. If you haven't already done that, and just select Nooga Radio, and there we are. And we're asking questions about prosperity. The larger question is about vague laws, and why is it that in countries that are, you might say, socialistic or socialized in their legal structures, where the state seems to own everything, the state has messianic meddlesomeness at every point, every turn, that there is no prosperity. Think of Venezuela, where an oil exporting, agricultural exporting country now is desperate at almost every turn because of the uncertainty of the law. The law, of course, is that those streams of words that the modern state writes. Laws should be minimal, but we live in the era that has of the modern state, right? The nation state, which has come with it a rejection of common law, a rejection of biblical foundations of law. And so there are innumerable laws, there are innumerable sub-laws, there are half laws that you call regulations that are written by the executive branch to enforce the statutes written by the legislature, right, the Congress. So you have regulations, and then you have policies. It goes down so that finally, in the end, the hapless businessman or the hapless investor or the capitalist or entrepreneur often really can't know for sure anything. And so he spends a large amount of his budget, which should go for advertising his business here on the radio station, goes to compliance, to pay for people to sniff out the dangers and to constantly warn about this, about that law, and about this policy and that policy, or this regulation written by the executive branch minions in the Death Star, the Death Star agency, which is already in its senescence and its decline, having lost its original goals decades ago, and now is simply protecting its turf and trying to keep its budget from shrinking. Well, this is David Tulis, and if you live in a country that doesn't have clear laws, whose laws are effectively void for vagueness, as we can find them here in America, you are not going to prosper. And so if we're going to have a prosperous Chattanooga local economy, a prosperous Red Bank, a prosperous East Ridge, Ottawa, if Ottawa is going to prosper, there have to be laws, if they need to be written as they are already today in the green volumes of the Tennessee Code annotated, be they clear, be they precise. And what do you mean? We say, what are you talking about, David? Well, for example, a law should make it clear how you come under it, right? The law should be very clear as to how you come under its provisions. That is to say, there should be a clear liability part of the statute. Many statutes, by the way, are thrown against people using only the punishment part, not the liability part. Because why? They don't have a liability provision. And so people are sued, they're criminally charged under statutes that have no liability provision. Or if they have a liability provision, it's vague, right? And you want it to be precise. Why do you want it to be precise? Well, because you want to know what your duties are, and you want to know exactly what you have to do to avoid being penalized. What do you do to avoid the threat and the fire and the brimstone in those words written by the General Assembly and codified in the Tennessee Code? How do you avoid those, or the Georgia Code? How do you avoid those sins, if you will? How do you live the virtuous life in terms of the activities or the positions that statute has in view, right? How do you do that? And if you're not sure, if you can't say for sure when you're under the statute's shadow and when you're under its bright light, you are not going to be a prosperous person. And that's why we have to pray, as I do every night at family worship. I pray for this criminal defendant. It's interesting how people whom I pray for the most often seem to be the worst people in society, right? They're criminals. They've been convicted of crimes. And yet we live in a time when the most virtuous people are those who are convicted. And I'm thinking about the fiddleman of Lawrence County, Jay Hershey, 65, a devout Christian man, has been a private businessman, been involved in Christian mercies all of his life with neighbors and people. He has a Bible study for Hispanics, though he doesn't speak Spanish. He gave some restaurant workers, one of them a Christian, he gave a colleague a Spanish Bible. and he deals with inmates at the jail in Lawrenceburg, which is a farm town in Middle Tennessee. And he visits the shut-ins in nursing homes, people who are neglected by their families, right? Families today, thanks to federal welfare, don't have to take care of their old people as they're admonished to in the commandments of honoring parents, right? You don't have to take care of your parents, honoring your mother and father. You don't have to do that. That's taken care of now by the state. You pay taxes after all, right? You file tax returns. And so the necessities that face the old people are met by Uncle, the Uncle Sam, and the good people in Washington. So those are the people that Jay Hirsch visits, gives gospel comforts to. Many of them are church people who know absolutely nothing about the Bible, having been decades in the Baptist church in Middle Tennessee, have never learned anything about God, never have no assurance of salvation, and who are just yearning for the truth. Oddly enough, they've been fed potato chips all their life in church, and no application given of Christian doctrine in their lives. So Jay's there to try to comfort and assure these people. Well, let's get to the point here, though. I mentioned two statutes. I mentioned the disorderly conduct statute in Title 39, and this one is one that you're just gonna have to laugh at how vague it is. Okay, you're gonna just have to absolutely laugh. And Hanson Melvin was charged with disorderly conduct, right? Hanson Melvin, whose case you can read about apparently only at Nooganomics.com. Other media outlets have thought it not worthy to mention his lawsuit against Officer David Campbell and city government for a culture, its culture of abuse, its culture of freewheeling police activism, apart from the requirement for probable cause. So he was charged under disorderly conduct, but if he'd gone another route, he could have sued to defeat the statute. And three, maybe just two, but maybe three of its five provisions are simply unconstitutional. For one, is you're involved in this when you're fighting, you're engaging in fighting or in violent or threatening behavior. Okay, that's pretty clear. Refuses to obey an official order to disperse issued to maintain public policy in dangerous proximity to fire. That's pretty clear too. Okay. You're told to disperse. Why? Because there's a fire nearby, a hazard, or there's an emergency. You're asked to leave, okay, and you don't leave. Okay, that is an official order given, and you're refusing. Oh, that's disorderly conduct. Okay, that's clear. That's pretty clear. Now here it gets into muzzy territory. You are guilty of this if you create a hazardous or physically offensive condition by an act that serves no legitimate purpose. What does that mean? What is hazardous or physically offensive? What is physically offensive? Can you have a hazardous condition? Okay, physically offensive condition, maybe, or by any act that serves who makes unreasonable noise. Unreasonable noise that prevents others from carrying on lawful activities. Now that is a joke. How can you make noise that is unreasonable? And how can mere noise, shouting, laughing, caterwauling, calling out, crying, screaming, shouting, how can that prevent someone from carrying on lawful activities? What is a lawful activity? Is having a conversation on a street corner a lawful activity between two private parties? That's lawful. Or is this a reference to governmental activities? You see, that's not clear. So unreasonable noise that prevents. How do you show that noise prevents a lawful activity from being done? How do you avoid violating this law? How do you actually violate this law? Where's the line between obedience and disobedience? It's not, so I'd say probably just two. Just two: serves no legitimate purpose and unreasonable noise that prevents. Those are the phrases that I would say are vague. They're vague and they should be thrown out. They should be stricken from the law. The other parts might be saved, but those are, and you see, they're so vague that the officer always has discretion, and they've been trained this way in Chattanooga. You have discretion, and you can just cite someone for whatever seems wrong to you. Okay, it just seems wrong to you or bothers you. Someone says no to you, and well, suddenly that person's involved in disorderly conduct because he says no. I'm not going to show you my driver's license because I'm walking, and no, I'm not giving you my social security number, which is what Hanson Melvin did. He refused to give that information out, and well, clearly that's you're preventing Officer David Campbell and his unnamed fellow colleagues are called John Does in the complaint. You're preventing them from carrying on lawful activities. So there you go. You see how vague that is? And so the statute needs to be overturned. It's void already, but it's continually used by the officers because no one has appealed it. I think it's interesting. My phone rang, and I was just wondering what that was about. So okay, so you have this. So among poor people, if you're poor, you're likely to be accused of this statute. And so the police have they can threaten and bully you because this statute is there. They can freely threaten and bully you because it's so vague. This is David Tulis, and call you're live on the David Tulis program. What's on your mind?
Hey, it's Steele, David. That's a great topic. Now, I want everyone to be absolutely clear on this. Not only are you not required to have a Social Security number, nor is your baby when they're born. Because every time I tell people I never gave my 14-year-old daughter a slave number, they go, how did you get away with that? Don't you love that line? How did you get away with that? Which tells me they're all brainwashed. You are not required to do anything in our republic, anything, unless ordered by a court, and it has to be a lawful order based on due process. You are not required to present any identification to anyone at any time unless you're operating the government's motor vehicle on their roads and you went and got a license. Other than that, the only thing the courts have ruled that you're required to do is give your name. And you can use any name you want as long as you don't do it for fraudulent purposes. You could change your name today to Jack Brown, but if you do it for fraudulent purposes, it's illegal. So if someone asks you, someone in so-called authority, because they're investigating a crime, what is your name? The courts have ruled you do have to give a name. Now, I'll argue that too, but I'm just telling you what the courts have said. But you're at no time, other than when you're operating the government's motor vehicle, because it's titled with the state, are you required to present identification.
Well, even there, Mike, even there, I would say that the officer has to have some authority, and if you politely ask the right question, you can determine whether he has to Mirandize you first. I would say if he stops you on the road, you are effectively under arrest. It's not just you are effectively arrested. It's not just detention.
Not effectively, you are arrested.
Yeah, you are arrested. So he should read your Miranda rights. And what do you hear in Miranda?
Anytime your freedom of movement is stopped, you're under arrest.
Right. When you hear when you are Mirandized, when the listener's Mirandized on the side of the street, he should ask for it. He should say, "Am I under arrest?" And then the officer is obligated to read him his Miranda rights. And there, the warnings are clear that anything you say or do will be used against you. So if you give your driver's license,
right,
or if you give anything at all, it will be used against you.
I don't like giving advice to criminals, and I doubt they're listening to us. But but if you're in a motor vehicle and you're stopped, it's assumed there's probable cause for the stopping. You do have to present your driver's license. Listen, first of all, you're in their vehicle. You don't own that vehicle. It's titled with the state. And you're probably a driver with a license and insurance. You're in the military. It's called the driver's military. You don't have any rights. You have privileges. They look like rights, but they're not. If you want to have rights and be a traveler, you have to have your property that's not titled with the state, no insurance, no driver's license, no registration. You can't have it both ways. You can't ask the permission from the state to operate their motor vehicle on their highways with a vehicle that's titled with them, and then say, "I'm not going to provide you information." Sorry, you're in the driver's military. It's a form of military operation. It's like being in the military and not wanting to comply with your superiors. No one asked you to get a driver's license. You've been conned into it. But the idea that you're not going to comply after you receive a license, it's like me. I have a pilot's license. I have to present that to the FAA if they ask. I'm the one that has to be regulated. Radio stations have FCC licenses. The FCC walks in, they have to present all the documentation they agree to under the license. So it's a little different than when you're driving, traveling, and just walking down the street. But walking down the street, you're obligated to present no identification at all, ever.
Right, because whatever you say and do can be used against you in a court of law. So even saying your name if you identify yourself, then the officer would be able to say, well, he said that this was his name in that encounter. And I'm listening to a lecture right now, Mike, that goes into these questions. And the speaker, a Texan, says that the listener should record every encounter with an officer, especially if the listener is keen on asserting his rights and defending them, because he knows that if he doesn't defend and assert his rights at the moment they're challenged, they don't exist, and he's effectively waived them.
Well, no, you can assert your rights at any time. You don't effectively waive them. You waive at that moment, but you can assert them at any time. You lose that moment to waive them, but you can still continue to assert them. And remember, the Fifth Amendment says testify. Giving your name is not a testimony. So the founders didn't want everyone's hands cuffed. If a suspect looks like you, and they robbed the bank, and you're on the street, and I ask you what your name is, and you don't give it to me, well, that's great. I'll just pull you in the police station. So you can do it the hard way or the easy way. So it's common sense. Everything's got to be tailored with common sense, understanding that most police want to do good, not bad. But it's the bad guys we got to get off the street.
Well, Mike, let me ask you about this disorderly conduct statute, and I'm suggesting that one of the vague provisions says it says creates a hazardous or physically offensive condition by any act that serves no legitimate purpose. And then the second one that's clearly vague, if to put it that way, says a person violates this section who makes unreasonable noise that prevents others from carrying on lawful activities. What does that mean? What is an unreasonable noise? And how does it prevent
there's
someone carrying on?
Statutes, and the first thing is there always has to be an escape clause. Not every statute applies to everyone, number one. If the statute applies to you, then it would be up to the jury to determine what was reasonable and not, based on bringing evidence. In other words, let's say you're in a residential area, and there's a bunch of old people, and you're throwing a party at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm sure you can be cited for unreasonable noise, and in front of a jury, the jury's going to say that wasn't reasonable. You're guilty. So it's the process. We live in an adversarial system. That's the way the system works. It's adversarial. Defense attorney, prosecutor, husband, wife, we're all adversaries, believe it or not. And it all comes down to reasonableness. That the police has to make the reasonable decision. The law. Now, where it comes down to, and we talked about this before, disorderly conduct is absurd. Because in the law, there has to be what's orderly conduct. So how can one be charged with disorderly conduct when they don't define what orderly is? That's the statute put in there to get you.
The lack of definitions is what Lord willing will be the downfall of the intent to go armed statute that Jay Hirsch is challenging, because there's no
David. It's definitions that have destroyed the republic by destroying the English language and not changing the Constitution or the law. From the word dollar to the word person to the word gay to the on and on and on and on. So let's not bother with debating and changing the law or the Constitution. Let's just change the language. And that's what the manipulators and the occupiers of all sides have done. You ask anyone what a dollar is, and they'll tell you it's a piece of paper. That tells you the entire nation has been brainwashed. Everyone has been brainwashed. Because you and I can sit down with them and in 2 minutes show them that piece of paper that they purchase goods and services with are not dollars. But yet they believe it is. Because since 1905, an entire nation has been brainwashed and manipulated through the use of media and mass media. And you and I know how to do that because we're in the media.
Well, this is David Tulis. We've been hearing from Mike. Mike, really appreciate your calling in. We're talking about the statute on regulating guns, and there's a little bit more that I want to mention about that. We do have news about the 3 nominees for the chief of police. I would say there are 2 nominees that would be seriously considered, and they both are in the police department. But that raises the question: if you have people who are in the culture that we have today, does that make reform less likely? And the answer is yes. Reform is less likely unless there's a long-held grievance by one of the 2 men who've been named. We'll mention them in just a minute. The other candidate is from Los Angeles Police Department, and I would say that's out of the question. Just because of that being a very violent area, and the police department of extraordinary violence in Los Angeles against the citizenry. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader. Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.